This is the Open University.
How I wrote accordion, how I wrote accordion. All right, welcome to the Open University, and this is a spoiler alert. If you don't want your narratives to be ruined by the authors imposing their intentions on you, switch off now. This is a song about how I wrote Akkordion, which is 6 songs in. It's the new Momus album to come out later in 2019 through Darla, and it's amazingly enough, sorry, dropped my hat. Amazingly enough, it's all about the accordion. That's where it all starts. I bought this in a junk shop just up the street, actually on the very site of the old Berlin Wall, a politically significant accordion then, which is playing a kind of garish clown music of protest against incipient fascism. Bear that in mind, my political message, my authorial intention. So you might think, wow, he's done 6 tracks in just over a week. He works fast. How does he bang them out like that? Well, you know me by now. I mean, I do bang things out. And I was watching a documentary about the Small Faces the other day. And they banged out #1 hit singles in 2 hours in the studio because they had Don Arden breathing down their backs, their manager telling them to get it done fast, lads. So I think, a lot of good music was banged out fast. And I tend to, like Rilke, with the Do We Know elegies, I tend to dam things up and then release them in a gush. So this is my gush. And I'm wearing the clown pants that I'm wearing in the video for the first track I composed, The World of Night, to really make the point that, and these glasses, which don't have any glass in them, but they do glow in the dark, they're fluorescent. So that's a point about we live in a world of night, and yet we have the ambition to glow. Really strong political point there. Let's glow in the dark. So I've always kind of done this in my music. There are Maoist clown whistles on, I Was a Maoist Intellectual, which is a weirdly popular song of mine these days. People on Twitter are still talking about that song. I think there's an interest in socialism. I thought, as I told you a couple of videos ago, I thought I was going to get into Hans Eisler on this record and use the accordion to make a lot of sort of Brechtian stuff. Actually, it's turned out a bit more of a clown show kind of approach, and but also some very pop moments. It's actually very kind of catchy album so far, which is kind of surprising. But I tend to, react against myself fairly rapidly, and each song is a kind of a dialectical response to the song before. So that works on that level as well. So anyway, World of Night. Brian Eno once said that hairstyles and clothes were actually a barometer of culture, that were very important and deserve to be taken seriously. I feel that as well. My girlfriend happens to work for a clothing company in Paris which sells military uniform, military surplus, sells them both to people in Africa who actually need to dress as firemen because they're really firemen, but also people in Asia like Japan, to people who are to hipsters basically, who want to look like they're wearing workwear. I don't really have a problem with workwear. It's a good socialist tradition of, identifying with the workers. But I do have a problem with people dressing, in sweatshirts that say NYPD, property of the New York Police Department, or trying to look military, or trying to look like, robbers on the street, or people who internalize fear of robbers by dressing like robbers. There are all sorts of weird things going on out there on the street, the way people are dressing, and I see fascism in this kind of identification with authority. Adorno wrote this book called The Authoritarian Personality, in which he included a thing called a psychometric measure called the policeman scale of interest, and he said that fascists, they had issues with their fathers and all the rest of it, but also they had an unhealthy fascination with policing matters. And, there's a Bowie line about switch the channels, watch the police car. Why do people have this fascination with policing, and why do they want to dress like policemen or bouncers? We're all their security guards is one of the key lines in this song. Why should we want to be security guards for the 1%? How does populism actually work, that we actually become the sort of military, the unofficial military of the 1%? I don't really understand this. There's also a line in there about never wear a colour because a colour is gay. This kind of refers to David Batchelor's book Chromophobia, in which he makes this huge argument saying that from Plato on downwards, Western culture has mistrusted colour and seen it as effeminate, seen it as druggy somehow, and seen it as a way that civilization collapses. I'm putting an opposite point of view, really, in this song, saying that maybe civilization collapses in the West because we all become pseudo-policemen wearing our Nike sportswear shoes with this swoosh, which sort of ticks us as fit for life. It's a Hobbesian struggle kind of view where we're all competing. And there's a lot of strong rhythms in the song, sax and accordion kind of punctuating it with strong honking rhythms. And the recorder, the influence of the Japanese pavilion maybe, but I have a recorder. I like to use the recorder as a kind of percussion instrument. Makes it sound more circus-like. And I guess, there's a bit of the Bayati kind of John Barry scale thing, a bit of the Ipcress files, a melancholic top line, but there's also this kind of a throwback to really the protest music of the 80s, which I remember, which is people like the Pogues and Band of Holy Joy, a kind of a righteous and radical accordion music from the 80s. So that's really what that song's doing, and I was very happy with the way that turned out. I think the accordion really, it's a really easy way to make chord sequences for a start, because you just press buttons with your left hand, and the rhythms are very strong because you really have to squeeze it. The accordion's strapped to your chest a bit like an extra pair of lungs. It's a very human instrument, and you kind of squeeze it, and each chord comes out with a different power, different strength, and it really gives a sort of dynamic center to the music. So the songs I've been writing have featured it. What the Kite Thinks started off as a cover of The Wanderer by Dion. Accordion. Dion's name is in that, not Celine Dion, you idiots. This is the original 50s Dion who well, this is the song I'm covering anyway. Here's a little clip of it. Well, I'm the type of guy who will never settle down. Well, pretty girls are, now that I'm around, I hug them and I kiss them, to me they're all the same. Jump right in the bed with them, don't even know their names. They call me the Wanderer, yeah, the Wanderer. I go round and round and round and round. Well, there's Jeannie on my left, Florrie on my right. Hug him when I kiss him, do it all night. One night, come and ask me which one I love the best. Rip open my shirt and there's Rosie on my chest. They call me the Wanderer, yeah, the Wanderer. All around and round and round and round. I'm happy as a cloud, rolling around. Come on, hand in my pocket. To this environment, going nowhere. So I took the blues structure of that and kind of made it a bit more Eno-esque, so it actually sounds, with this sort of electronic stuff that I've got going over the top of it, sounds like an outtake from Taking Tiger Mountain by Strategy, which is one of my favourite records of all time. There's a reference to Willikins and his Diner, which is an old music hall song about a sort of tragic-comic song about a man who tries to marry off his daughter, and then his daughter commits suicide and he commits suicide too. The title, What the Kite Thinks, it comes from a Makoto Oka poem. Makoto Oka was this poet who was writing a poem every day, which was published on the cover of the Asahi Shimbun, Japan's biggest broadsheet newspaper, and he became very famous doing this. I kind of took a long time. This went through many changes, this song. It was, first of all, it was a cover of The Wanderer, then it became The Refugee. I'm free because I don't have any family, I don't have a home, I don't have anything at all, a country, so I'm a refugee and I'm free. Kind of ironic, but a bit too newspapery. And then it became a song called The Narcissist, they call me The Narcissist. And that was obviously about Trump, and I'm sick of writing songs about Trump, fuck off Trump, I don't want to think about you. Although he is obviously there as the narcissist in chief. So generally I have a rule of thumb that if a song is taking more than a day or two to finish, then I should just abandon it. But actually I pushed through, and this became something quite interesting and certainly catchy and rambunctious. And so I'm kind of glad that I persisted with it. I didn't like it when I'd finished it, but I kind of do like it again now. The third song is called The Poet. I tend to react against the last song. I think the last song was overproduced. A little bit too much sugar in the honey or whatever. And so The Poet is returning to clarity, coherence and narrative, which are three key virtues. 1, 2, 3 key virtues of Momus songs. it's kind of anti-rock aesthetic, because rock songs don't tend to. In the 50s, maybe they did tell strong stories. Like The Wanderer is quite a strong story with his two fists of iron. He's going nowhere. He's an existential anti-hero. I've got an anti-hero who's a jail, but he's come out of jail after doing a year for robbery, and he's telling his ex-accomplice about. It seems to be about a plan for a new robbery, but actually he's telling his ex-accomplice that he wants to become a poet, and he does. He becomes a very successful poet. And actually, I used the visual material for the video is from a fantastic 1966 educational film called USA Poetry. The whole series of these on YouTube, I would recommend them. Directed by Richard O. Moore for 13WNet in New York, and it's a 16mm black and white film of the poet Frank O'Hara from the New York School. I was reading this book, The Last Avant-Garde, by David Lehman. This came out in 1999. It's a fantastic book about the New York School. Kenneth Koch, probably the poet I feel personally closest to from that group. But Frank O'Hara was an art critic and very much influenced by painters. What you see in that 1966 film is Frank O'Hara just before his death, because he was hit by a jeep out on Fire Island. This is actually another reference in the song that I wrote later, People Are Turning to Gold, to Frank O'Hara, because he was killed by a joyrider. His taxi broke down 4 a.m. or something, and he was hit by this guy who was only driving at 20 miles an hour. So he died tragically young. So you see his kind of studio and painter studios and things like that, and it's a great film. The poet, he has a happy ending in my song. Didn't in real life, but in my song he gets a big advance and buys a nice house in France. This is kind of autobiographical because I got a big advance for my book from Macmillan. So I kind of rather like to think of me being like a happy version of Frank O'Hara. I'm sure Frank was very happy during his life. The next song is called Lardy Bastard, and it's obviously about Nigel Farage, the Gammon Hood's own Goblin King. And it's kind of very like Will Self's favourite song, because it uses these very highfalutin words, most of which come from Frederick Rolfe, who wrote this fantastic book called Hadrian VII, which was about an Englishman who suddenly becomes Pope through some weird machinations of the Catholic Church, the electoral process. And he, in a way, Farage is about to become our Cromwell, the new Oliver Cromwell, for worse or worse. And the sort of current crisis of the Tory party is all about the fact that they all know this, that Farage is destined to become our Cromwell in a horrible fascist Brexit Britain. And so I used the old Ladybird, Ladybird, Fly Away Home rhyme to say Lardy Bastard, Fly Away Home. It's all about going mother at the garden gate, just as Rootless Cosmopolitans on the last album talks about. This is this kind of weird new kind of retrenchment in people's national boundaries that's going on, and which I very much am against, obviously. He's the estuary Hitler, he's a snollygoster, that's a real word. These are all real words. Dicaculus is Janus on a Toby mug. Coprolalian, stockbroking rapscallion. In a way, the ultimate revenge on the kind of illiterate or semi-illiterate Brexiteers, the Gammons, is to be ultra-literate, and to kind of condemn them in words they couldn't even think of spelling, let alone understanding, because they're people who can't even put apostrophes in the right place. So this is my kind of pathetic gesture of elitist rejection of their worldview. Fulgurating technicrim Gammon Hood's own Goblin King. So it's an ultra-literary approach to illiteracy, and a kind of lugubrious waltz, a bit like Leonard Cohen's Sisters of Mercy, also with, of course, the Laurel and Hardy theme tune stuck in the middle of it. And I guess I'm kind of saying that Farage is somewhere in between Oliver Cromwell and Oliver Hardy, who was Lardy. I don't really understand why stockbrokers are populists. I mean, people really are stupid. God, why do they actually endorse people who don't have any kind of positive vision for either them or the world? They've only got positive vision for the 1%. Anyway, it doesn't make sense to me. The next song was a kind of reaction again against that. That sounded a bit like Ex-Erotoman or something, very lugubrious song, but I decided to make a very poppy song, which was probably a throwback to songs like Cameo, But People Are Turning to Gold was the original title that David Bowie chose for Ashes to Ashes. And at the V&A show, you got these little glimpses of old lyric sheets of Bowie, and of course, if you're into Bowie, you kind of know that he had all these titles: "Cameras in Brooklyn," "I Am a Laser," old Astronauts titles that he wanted to use, and each one is a kind of parallel world, because you kind of think to yourself, well, if there'd been a record between Scary Monsters and Let's Dance, let's say, with Nile Rodgers coming in to do demos, and maybe they would have done People Are Turning to Gold. Obviously, Bowie had read a newspaper somewhere which had a report about the increase in gold investment in response to the Afghan crisis in 1979, when the Soviet tanks rolled into Afghanistan, and there was a notable tension in the world. If that line about if they should shoot some of those missiles, think of us as fatherless scum, all that stuff, that's from that period of tension, which I remember as a 19-year-old in 1979. So my song is probably happening a bit later. It's an imaginary parallel universe where, the dream where you are David Bowie performing People Are Turning to Gold on Top of the Pops in 1982, Janice Long is introducing you, that whole thing. And you're making this kind of, a bit like the Queen track, Under Pressure. You're making this track which is affirming humanist values in the face of Thatcher Reagan, that new era where people were turning to gold, they were turning to capitalistic and financial values. People who make me sick, people who worship arithmetic. And then late on in the writing process, it was a pretty funky riff that I came up with one of these big Swain and Jolly bass lines. I love bands like Loose Ends and Freeze and Chic, of course, and the Swain and Jolly production team. It had that groove and it was building nicely, but then it needed a middle section. So I did this Lennon-esque middle section where you just say, just because Frank Smudge has stopped evolving doesn't mean the world must stop revolving. We need to fix the planet, just the basic political message, let's fix the planet rather than making the wealthy even wealthier. So it becomes, again, a protest song, but it's also a pastiche, and I do love my pastiche. I love to investigate. It's not so much just to sound a bit like the past, but it's also investigating worlds that might have been side worlds that we didn't quite achieve in the past, going back to the past like a sort of a model maker or an archaeologist or something. And it takes me to the world of Keith Haring and Live Aid and, sort of Catherine Hemnett T-shirts and all that sort of guilty side of political activism in the 80s, even when people were scoring the big bucks. The sixth song is called Grand Guignol, and it's a lyric I actually wrote for What the Kite Thinks, and it was kind of not fitting in that song either, but I married that together with a middle eight I'd written for an Ariel Pink song called Kitchen Witch. I interviewed Ariel Pink car crash outside. I interviewed Ariel Pink in 2017 for a magazine, and he casually said, I've got this new album coming out, and I want you to maybe, this song Kitchen Witch kind of needs a new section. Could you write a middle section for it? And we go back a long way, me and Ariel. I have met him only once when he was an unknown. And he said that in the interview, he said he felt he was famous when he had been mentioned in my blog, Click Opera. So we're kind of mutual fans, I guess. And so I wrote this song about, I'm always your monkey and I'm going down, I'm beautiful. And that was the bit for Ariel Pink. And then I kind of wrote a song, a kind of Steely Dan-esque song around that. And I worked on the arrangement for a long time, simplifying it and making it punchy. And it's just got this honking sax again. Musically, the album is all about the honking sax and the kind of theremin sound, which is an iPad sound actually from GarageBand again. And the accordion, of course. So that's halfway. Let's see where it goes from here. Spoilers. I'm sorry I've spoiled it, but you've got your own interpretations. Go below the line and tell me your interpretations.
Open University.